September 10th, 2025. Orem, Utah Valley University. The sun is high. Nearly 3,000 people have gathered on an open campus courtyard. They are here for a debate. The man they came to see is 31 years old. He is standing under a tent, microphone in hand, mid-sentence, answering a question a student has just asked him. His name is Charlie Kirk. 142 yards away, on the roof of a nearby building, a single shot is fired. It strikes him in the neck. Within seconds, his security team is moving. He is carried to a vehicle. He is rushed to a hospital. He is pronounced dead a short time later. What follows is not a story that ends that day. It is the beginning of a manhunt, a nationwide reckoning, and a criminal case that, as of this recording, is still being decided in a Utah courtroom. This is that story. Charlie Kirk was not a stranger to American politics. He was a co-founder and the leader of Turning Point USA, a conservative youth organization that had spent over a decade building influence on college campuses across the country. He was known for a particular format, standing in public, often outdoors, and inviting anyone in the crowd to challenge him, question him, or debate him directly. That format is what brought him to Utah Valley University that September afternoon. He was, by the account of those who covered him, a close ally of President Donald Trump, and one of the most recognizable figures in the modern conservative movement. He had built a network that reached deep into youth politics, campus organizing, and national media. On that day, he was simply a speaker at a tent, answering a question from a student in the crowd. He never got to finish his answer. Investigators would later determine the shot came from a rooftop, approximately 142 yards from where Kirk stood. A distance that, in the language of long-range shooting, requires deliberate positioning, a stable platform, and time. Time to leave undetected, at least for a while. A former Utah Valley University security officer, Christopher Bagley, was posted that day in a building overlooking the amphitheater where Kirk was speaking. Bagley would later testify that he discovered what investigators termed a sniper pad on the roof of a nearby building, a term used to describe a position built or used for the purpose of a long-range shot. Kirk's own security detail responded within moments. He was carried away and transported to a local hospital. It was not enough. In the chaos that followed, the shooter fled on foot. A manhunt began. It would last through the night. For law enforcement, the hours after a public assassination are a race against disappearance. A shooter with a head start, a crowd of thousands to search through, and a campus that had just become a crime scene. Authorities released photographs of a suspect. They asked the public for help identifying him. The break in the case did not come from a task force or a tip line, in the way many expect. It came from a father. According to officials, the father of a 22-year-old man named Tyler James Robinson recognized his own son in the released photographs. He contacted law enforcement. On the night of September 11, 2025, approximately one day after the shooting, Tyler Robinson surrendered to authorities. The manhunt was over. The legal case was only beginning. Tyler James Robinson was, at the time of his surrender, 22 years old, from Washington, Utah. He is now reported as 23. On September 16, 2025, prosecutors filed charges. The charges were not modest. Robinson was charged with 1 count of aggravated murder, 1 count of felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of witness tampering, 3 counts of victim targeting enhancement, 1 count of committing violence in the presence of a child. Utah prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. Under Utah law, prosecutors must point to specific aggravating factors to justify that pursuit. In this case, they pointed to 2. That Robinson allegedly targeted Kirk specifically because of his political expression, and that he allegedly acted knowing children would witness the killing. Robinson has not entered a plea. His defense attorneys, first Catherine Nestor, appointed September 24th, and later attorneys Stacey Visser and Michael Burt, have made no public statement on his guilt or innocence. That is the presumption under which he currently stands. Not guilty, unless and until a court says otherwise. According to statements made by prosecutors in court filings and hearings, The case against Robinson rests on several pillars. First, prosecutors allege that Robinson confessed, or at minimum implied his involvement in the shooting, to a family member. Second, prosecutors say that after the shooting, Robinson sent a text message to his roommate. In that message, according to prosecutors, he described the location of a note. The note, prosecutors allege, stated that Robinson had an opportunity to, in his words, take out Charlie Kirk, and that he planned to act on it. Third, physical evidence at the scene, including what Officer Christopher Bagley described as a sniper pad on a nearby rooftop. Fourth, surveillance footage from Utah Valley University's campus cameras, which prosecutors say captures the shooting itself. Chief Deputy Utah County Attorney Chad Grunander told the court that as many as 50 exhibits would be presented during preliminary proceedings, including multiple videos of the shooting. Videos so graphic in nature that even in open court, they were not displayed publicly. None of this evidence has yet been tested at trial. It has been presented thus far only in the context of a preliminary hearing, a legal proceeding with a specific and limited purpose, which we will return to. The killing of Charlie Kirk did not stay contained to a courtroom or a campus. It moved almost instantly into the center of American public life. President Trump, who had a close relationship with Kirk, on October 14, 2025, in a ceremony in the Rose Garden of the White House, Trump posthumously awarded Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom, presenting it to Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk. The reaction across media and public commentary was, by most accounts, sharply divided, not on whether the killing was a tragedy, but on how it should be discussed, and by whom. Far-right activist Laura Loomer called publicly for retribution, and took part in identifying and publicizing the identities of people accused of celebrating or excusing Kirk's death. Separately, a website first named Expose Charlie's Murderers, later rebranded as the Charlie Kirk Data Foundation, collected more than 63,000 public submissions related to Kirk, reportedly targeting people who had made comments about his death online. The site, hosted on the platform Epic, was taken down on September 16th, after Epic determined it had violated the platform's terms of service, citing false registration information and credible threats of cyber attack against the site. Independent cybersecurity researchers who reviewed the site's activity characterized it as functioning to coordinate harassment campaigns against private individuals. Television took its own turn into the story. On September 12th, ABC late-night host Jimmy Kimmel criticized President Trump on air, arguing the administration had responded to the killing by attacking political opponents rather than working to unite the country. Days later, on September 15th, Kimmel said on his program that segments of the political right were trying to distance the shooter from their own movement, while using the tragedy for political gain. The Federal Communications Commission's chairman Brendan Carr said publicly that Kimmel appeared to be misleading the American public and raised the possibility of action against ABC, including against the broadcast licenses of its own stations. Nexstar Media Group, which owned a number of ABC affiliate stations and was separately pursuing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of Tegna Inc. at the time, announced on September 17th that it would preempt Kimmel's program across its stations for the foreseeable future. Even the music industry was drawn in. At a concert in Amsterdam, on September 14th, English musician Bobby Violin, of the duo Bob Violin, made comments mocking Kirk's death on stage. A subsequent concert by the group in Tilburg was cancelled by the venue. On the other end of the spectrum, an AI-generated tribute song was released commercially within days of the killing, and briefly topped a major streaming platform's viral chart. What all of this reveals, beyond the specifics of any single reaction, is the scale of what had happened. This was not simply a crime. It became almost immediately a referendum on American political culture itself. Before we go further, it is worth pausing to explain plainly what has and has not yet happened in this case, because the language used around it matters. A preliminary hearing is not a trial. Its purpose under Utah law is narrow. Prosecutors must show a judge that there are reasonable grounds to believe a crime occurred and that the accused person may have committed it. That is a far lower bar than the standard required for conviction. At trial, if this case proceeds to one, prosecutors would need to prove Robinson's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. At a preliminary hearing, they need only clear a much lower threshold to send the case forward. This distinction is not a technicality. It is the difference between an accusation being tested for probable cause and an accusation being proven. As of this recording, Robinson has not been convicted of any crime. The case moved through Utah's 4th District Court over the following months, under Judge Tony Graff Jr. On October 24, 2025, a hearing was held to determine something that might seem procedural, but carries real weight in how a jury may later perceive a defendant. Whether Robinson could appear in future court dates, wearing civilian clothing and without visible restraints, rather than in a prison uniform. The defense argued that appearing in jail clothing in front of cameras, and eventually a jury pool, could unfairly prejudice how Robinson was perceived before any verdict was reached. In March 2026, the case took another procedural turn. Robinson's defense team sought to keep certain court motions sealed from public view, arguing that unsealing them would only amplify accusations already circulating in the media and make it harder to seat an impartial jury. Attorney Stacey Visser told the court that whatever the specific content, its release would make jury selection more difficult in either direction. Attorney Michael Burt argued that some material, including alleged confessions and statements made by public figures, including President Trump, deserved to remain private given the volume of pre-trial publicity already surrounding the case. Judge Graff disagreed. On March 13, 2026, he ruled to unseal the majority of the documents in question, finding that most of the claims within them already existed in the public record. He did allow the defense the option to file a redacted version of one specific motion. Prosecutor Christopher Ballard, representing the Utah County Attorney's Office, argued that concerns about jury contamination could be addressed through the jury selection process itself, through an expanded jury pool, detailed juror questionnaires, and the ability to question potential jurors directly about their exposure to pretrial coverage. Which brings us to the most significant point in this case so far. On Monday, July 6, 2026, a preliminary hearing began in the 4th District Courthouse in Provo, Utah, a hearing expected to last up to 5 days, and the most substantial presentation of evidence in the case to date. The courthouse itself was under heavy security. Armed officers with binoculars were stationed on the courthouse roof. Additional officers stood watch on the ground. A drone circled overhead. Inside, history of a different kind took place. For the first time since the shooting, Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, and his parents Robert and Catherine Kirk sat in the same room as the man accused of killing him. Donald Trump Jr. was also present in the courtroom. Outside, members of the public lined up for one of only 14 seats set aside for spectators. One attendee, a nearby resident named Shelley Juber, described herself to reporters as a trial watcher and true crime enthusiast, noting that her granddaughter's boyfriend had been present on campus the day of the shooting. The first witness called by the state was the same officer whose testimony would anchor much of the week, Christopher Bagley, the former Utah Valley University officer who had been posted in the Hall of Flags, the building overlooking the amphitheater, on the day of the shooting. Prosecutors, through Chief Deputy Utah County Attorney Chad Grunander, indicated they intended to introduce roughly 50 exhibits, including video recorded on Utah Valley University's own surveillance systems, capturing the moment Kirk was shot. Due to the graphic nature of that footage, it was submitted into evidence, but not displayed to the public gallery. By the end of the first day, no major new revelations had emerged, beyond what had already become public over the preceding months: the discovery of the rooftop position, the video evidence, and the account of the responding officer. Following the hearing, Erica Kirk left the courthouse flanked by security, declining to speak to the assembled media. The family, through a statement, addressed the toll the process was taking on them directly. Every court proceeding serves as a painful reminder of his death, and the loss that has irrevocably impacted our lives and the lives of his children, the family said. They added that they remained grateful for the support they had received, describing it as something that had sustained them through what they called the darkest days of their lives. They asked, in closing, for continued privacy as the legal process moves forward. The hearing was scheduled to continue the following day, with prosecutors expected to attempt once again to introduce the surveillance footage compiled from that day on campus. A former Utah judge, asked to assess the state's chances, offered the observation that prosecutors would likely be able to clear the legal threshold required to send the case to trial. A reflection again of how comparatively low that bar is, not a comment on Robinson's ultimate guilt or innocence. As of this recording, here is what can be said with confidence, based on what has been presented in court and reported by credible sources. Charlie Kirk, a nationally known conservative activist and organizer, was shot and killed on September 10, 2025, at Utah Valley University in what prosecutors allege was a targeted, politically motivated attack. Tyler James Robinson was identified, surrendered to authorities, and has been charged with aggravated murder and related offenses. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Robinson has not entered a plea, he has not been tried, he has not been convicted. A preliminary hearing, not a trial, is underway as of July 2026, intended only to determine whether the case has enough evidentiary weight to proceed further. What prosecutors have presented so far includes alleged statements from Robinson to a family member, a note allegedly describing intent, physical evidence recovered from a rooftop position, and surveillance video of the shooting itself. None of this has yet been weighed by a jury, none of it has yet been tested through cross-examination at a full trial. The presumption of innocence remains, as it must, in force. What is not in question is the scale of what this single act set into motion. A nationwide political reaction, a media firestorm touching everything from late-night television to the music industry, and a grieving family that has, in their own words, been forced to relive their loss in public, one hearing at a time. The courtroom in Provo, Utah, is where the facts of this case will ultimately be decided, not in headlines, not in commentary, and not here. It is not yet where it ends. This account is constructed entirely from verified reporting. Court filings, statements made on the record by named officials and attorneys, and reporting from established outlets, including the Associated Press, ABC News, Courthouse News Service, and contemporaneous coverage of the case. No dialogue, scene, or detail has been invented. Direct claims made by prosecutors or the defense are attributed as allegations, not established fact, because as of this recording, no trial verdict has been reached. Any future narration of this case should be updated to reflect the outcome of the preliminary hearing and any subsequent trial. Subscribe for more real crime investigations, covered with accuracy and respect.